Okay, we're going to start. Let me begin here by sharing screen. This is where we left off last time. We had discussed ontology, which remember is one of the five or so fields of philosophy, depending on how you number them. It's perhaps the main. I think it's kind of a toss up between whether ontology, epistemology, or logic is the most important contribution of philosophy to the world, because almost everything that we think, everything that we think, science itself, takes a position on one of these levels of question of what is, which is ontology, or the question of how we know it, which is epistemology, or the very structure, including the mathematical structure of reality. And one of the most interesting things about all of this is that things we see, perceive, whether we consider them in the mind or in reality, all seem to circle back into a formula system. And that's the reason that mathematics works hand in glove with philosophy. But that structure is a philosophical concept. So science is dependent upon both ontology, epistemology, and certainly mathematics. So when Einstein writes E equals mc squared, that's a mathematical structure, but it explains reality. So logic and ontology are fitted together. Now, we don't know why that's true. It simply is true for the way, at least we human beings, approach the question of what is. I can't, philosophers differ between whether that really is the structure of reality or simply our box that we put reality in. It doesn't make any difference ultimately, because our best chance of explaining this, whether it be outside of us or inside of us, is this procedure that we call philosophy and science. So that's ontology. Epistemology, again, is trying to answer the question of how do we know something? And there are two answers to that too. Rationalism, which says that the truth is in the brain, according to most philosophers, or in the soul, and that soul's connection to ultimate reality, which is Plato's answer. That's on one side. On the other is empiricism, that says that we know nothing until we experience it. There's nothing behind experience, no concept, no percept. There simply is nothing before there is the experience of something. So that's the answer to how we know. Either we know through some kind of innate ideas, rationalism, or we know simply through what we see, which is empiricism. So I said here, and as you review this, you can slow it down or copy this off in your own notes or make some sense out of it in your own way. Rationalism argues that we know things through ideas we are born with. Normally, they call those innate ideas. The medieval philosophers sort of invented that idea of innate idea. It's made more famous by Descartes, 17th century French philosopher, I think he's the one that coins the exact phrase innate ideas. So that's one side of the epistemology spectrum. The other side of the epistemology spectrum is empiricism, and empiricism argues that we come to know things only through experience. One of the greatest philosophers of all time, and an early empiricist, the Englishman John Locke, held a one-to-one correspondence theory between our experience and things. He thought, and this is, a lot of people give Locke credit for this, but it's really an invention of Aristotle, who argued that our experience of a thing and the thing itself is the same thing. So this USB stick drive here, my idea of that and this thing are melded together according to Locke and Aristotle. A one-to-one correspondence theory. It's sometimes called the correspondence theory of truth. And that's come to be called a kind of, I guess we might say, a common sense approach. Now, later and more aggressive empiricist, and David Hume is a Scottish philosopher, late 18th, early 19th, was skeptical even of this claim. Sometimes, and I think probably people are right about this, many people consider Hume what's known as a solipsist. I'll write that word out for you here. A solipsist says that we can know nothing. We actually know nothing at all. And later on in the course, when we start talking about Immanuel Kant, we'll bring up David Hume again, because Kant gives David Hume a lot of credit for helping him understand more about philosophy. And a lot of what Kant does is answering Hume. Now, I'm going to assign, and it'll be due toward the middle of March. And let me make a note here. I'm making a note that it's due in March. I had said sometime in April, but I think that's too quick. I'm going to send you a link, or not send you a link, but provide a link on Blackboard to the part of the Republic where Plato discusses what he calls the divided line, or the myth of the cave, and lays out his epistemology and ontology. But Plato argues that there's an ascending order of reality from more real to less real. The good and the beautiful, he uses ide form, the good and the beautiful, almost interchangeably, at least in the early dialogues. And that is comprehended by the soul. Now, he uses the word in Greek is anamnesis. That's translated as remember, remembrance. In the New Testament, for instance, St. Paul talks a lot about anamnesis, about remembrance. But he borrows that in some ways from Plato. I don't know he knows that, but he does. But the form, or the good and the beautiful, is recollected, I guess we might say, by the soul. The soul inside us, wherever that might be, is the thing which ties us to ultimate reality, to the realm of the forms. And that is always good and it's always beautiful. And it's the highest level of knowledge that we can have. Now, downstream a little bit from the ultimate reality is mathematics, which is a mental construct. I'm not sure I agree with Plato on this, and I'm not sure Plato really means this. That's a topic for later. But mental is the highest that the human being can get in terms of on her own, from her own status, comprehending reality. It's an intellectual pursuit, and reality is divided above our even good intellect, to say the least of the bad. And that's where mathematics more closely approximates this realm of the forms. It's as close as we can get intellectually to that. And we can mentally, we can start to get there, Plato argues, but we can't get there. So we need to have this anamnesis, this ide, the good and the beautiful, in order to incite us, I guess we might say, to discover ultimate reality. Next, lower than this are things that he calls the visible things. And by that, he means what we perceive. So looking at the table, that's less real than the mathematical description of the table, but it is still higher than a picture of the table. And that's where he talks about icons, or what he didn't understand what we would understand by photography, but photography would be such an idea as an icon. So it's pictures. For him, it's described mathematically as one or two dimensions. So that's less real. So we began with the form, then the mathematics, then the actual reality, the visible things, and finally with just the picture, or the representation, I guess we might say, of the thing. Now, I want to take this opportunity to open up a copy of the text. Now, some of you have had questions about where to find the assignments. This is the MindTap textbook here. The assignment to look at how to do, write, and think philosophy is here under Philosophy Toolbox. So if you're trying to find that, that's where you discover this, and you drop down with a chevron arrow here. Now the glossary is cleverly concealed over here on the right side with this little icon. Less real, right? This little icon here, the yellow box that says A to Z. If you click on that, it opens up the glossary. So please, I had suggested that you finish this by the end of this week. So please familiarize yourself with those two assignments by Friday. You don't have to have it done by Friday, but you might start getting behind if you don't. So here's Philosophy Toolbox. And over here is glossary. You see when I move the cursor over the little A to Z yellow box, it says glossary. Now you may have to go in and tick on show hidden here in order to get that. I don't know how that's appearing on your student copy of the text, but you may have to play around with the settings up here. Okay? So that is, that's that assignment. So let me go back to back into the lecture here. So that's looking at the appendix. Now, I mean, I call it appendix, and in the real textbook, it is the appendix. I don't know why they break out the e-textbook differently than the actual textbook. You would think that they would be capable of making them look the same. Don't ask me why publishers do what they do. It doesn't make any sense. And by the way, textbooks are a ripoff. You know, you think you're getting this one for free, but I assure you that it is not free. You're paying for it in your fees. So there's no such thing as a free textbook. And I really oppose textbooks because there's absolutely no reason on the internet right now that you need a textbook. The physical copy of this textbook, I think I showed it to you before. The physical copy of the textbook here is hugely expensive. And it's just a paperback. You can go on Amazon and buy the current bestseller for, $10, but you pay $100 or so for these things. It's just, it's a ripoff. You students are being ripped off, and you ought to be really angry about it. I am. All right, get back to the nitty gritty of things here. I want you to understand, as you look at this glossary and look at the terms, the main focus of philosophy is and always has been having humility rather than pride in the face of reality. In other words, we simply sometimes don't know, and we ought to be honest about that. That's one of the things that makes Plato so great. Now, whether he's right or whether he's wrong, he was humbled by reality. He changes over his lifespan of 80 years, which was old for pre-first century societies. He was an old man, and all of that time he remained young up here because he kept looking deeper and deeper and deeper. And of course, his student Aristotle is the same. I mean, he had Alexander send him all kinds of animals and specimens and minerals and rocks from all across the world where Alexander set foot. He shipped all of this stuff back to his teacher, Aristotle, because Aristotle and Plato are 2-year-olds. Now, many of you who have young children, you know the terrible twos. The 2-year-old's main focus in life is why mommy, why daddy, why? And the great Aquinas said that the real questions of life, the most important questions of life were what he called qua, Q-U-A questions, Latin for why. So your 2-year-old is a perfect philosopher. They want to know why to everything. They're just immersing themselves in the attempt to gain knowledge, which is what philosophy humbly tries to do. By the time they get into high school, that's been beaten out of them. I mean, not literally, but it's been sequestered. It's been tapped down because the way things are taught these days, why is really an aggravating idea. We're expected to have a certain ideology, not to ask why. So whether you accept the bottom line of the university or the society is the most important thing. And if you don't do that, asking why is a dangerous question. Well, it always has been. Obviously, they put Socrates to death for asking why. But uh, so when your 2-year-old aggravates you by asking why, I'm suggesting you be more like your 2-year-old rather than making your 2-year-old subservient to an academy, to an academic structure which no longer appreciates that question of why. Philosophy always should be the freedom to ask why. But to sort of have a humility about that, because all of us don't know the answer. So this is a project. Philosophy and science is a project that we work on to support each other's questions of why. And if it doesn't do that, it's no longer philosophy or science. And we face so many contemporary situations because philosophy and science have been subverted into the least common denominator. And when they no longer ask why, we suffer. Humanity suffers. All right. Now, the Greeks were always interested in a proper approach, not just to philosophy, but to thinking and our time together, however we do that in families or groups or classes or disciplines. They thought that everything that we do was the important things that we do were controlled by our, shall we say, attitude. And the proper attitude of the human being, the Greeks called it an arete. That's usually translated as virtue, virtue. But that's simply a misnomer because arete literally in Greek means excellence. And different objects can have excellence or virtue. The example I give often is the thoroughbred racehorse. What's the purpose of the thoroughbred racehorse? It is to win races. So if you have a thoroughbred, a good thoroughbred that goes out and does what the good thoroughbred does, that horse has arete or virtue because it does what it's supposed to do. That's simply what arete means. And what human beings were supposed to do in order to have a good life inside and an important life outside, they were to develop 4 different attitudes, 4 different aretes, so that they would then be complete and good, in other words, doing what they were supposed to do, human beings. St. Thomas called them cardinal virtues, but they are justice, dikaiosune in Greek, prudence, pronesis, which means to literally to think before. When I was a lad, my dad had a favorite saying, think twice, cut once. I don't know, maybe your mother or father has said that to you at some point. That's pronesis. That's thinking before. So justice, prudence, moderation, sophrosyne in Greek, which means not so much moderate. We think of moderate in political terms these days, but this is not the sense in Greek. Sophrosyne is a median level. Not, food is a good thing, but if you overconsume, no matter what you overconsume, typically you suffer. If you don't have enough, you suffer. So Sophrosine is right there in the middle, kind of the Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold. So that's that's the sense of Sophrosine. And of course, the last thing is Andrea, uh, which is courage. Now, we don't have an Andrea here, but our word Andrew, our name Andrew, and our feminine name for that Andrea is courage. So we name our girls Courage sometimes, and that's good. Would that they were truly Andrea, courageous. Now, what we're going to do, and the most important thing you've got to remember, and connecting what I'm saying here to this idea of going over how to write a philosophy paper, I want you to always apply these concepts to your writing and your thinking and your speech. If this is truly how we police ourselves, to always have higher motives. So honesty and all of these virtues are examples of integrity when it comes to how we approach each other in this course, how we approach how our social interactions ought to be, how our writing ought to be, always looking for the truth, being courageous, not being stymied by others or so many times we are bullied. This is one way not to be bullied, but either bullied by social media or bullied by our neighbor. This is how we stand our ground with integrity. We do this in our philosophy, and I hope that your takeaway from this course will be to apply this to your life. To be just, to think ahead, to be moderate in your beliefs and your actions, and to have the courage to stick by that, even when things get tough and people stand against you, not to give up. All right. Now, I want to start moving into the text. Now let's see how far we are into we're about 28 minutes into our time. We're going to go probably another 10 minutes here. And you can find some of this in the first chapter of Poemen. And that's how I'm going to refer to the text, by the way, is by the professor's name, Poemen, P-O-J-M-A-N. It looks like it's Pojman, but it's poi, like an I, Poemen. Now, we've talked about all the different aspects of philosophy, and ethics is simply one of those 5 or so typologies within philosophy. It's dependent upon logic and epistemology and ontology. And it's important that when we do ethics, that we apply all of these different aspects of philosophy, including what we've said about individual integrity, to our thinking about what acts are right. And that's what moral theory asks. What acts are right? What should I do? And it applies ontology, epistemology, and logic to that question. So it's not what other people tell you to do. That's not necessarily right. What you're forced to do, obeying the law, that's not necessarily right. Sometimes doing the right thing is not obeying the law. And when we get to St. Thomas Aquinas, we're going to find that out. Dr. King, by the way, was trained at Brown University, did his PhD there. That is a Jesuit school. He was trained in St. Thomas Aquinas. So when he writes the letter from the Birmingham jail, he begins the work by quoting Aquinas. And that's the reason he did it, because he was trained in Aquinas philosophy. And that's the way he begins the work. And he's taught that, and that's part of himself simply because he's had that training from the Jesuit philosophers at Brown. And he says an unjust law is not a law. Now, he didn't invent that. That's St. Thomas Aquinas. So we are not ethically bound by an unjust law. That's what got Germany into trouble in the 30s and the 40s, is following, acquiescing, giving up to unjust laws. Sometimes this justice, prudence, moderation, and courage demand action against being forced into ways of thinking which are not congruent with epistemology, metaphysics, and logic. And that's what we study in ethics. And that's why I say that a truly ethical person is dangerous to most societies. So if you want to live a life of integrity, uprightness, courage, sometimes, maybe even often, you're going to find yourself being opposed by the law. What ethics does is to hopefully instill in you the courage to move beyond that and to take risks to supplant that or move beyond it. All right. Now let's talk about three things that are confused with religion. First of all, three things confused with ethics or moral theory. The first of it is religion. In religion, right and wrong are based upon faith and not reason. Now, that's not always true. The work of St. Thomas Aquinas, for instance, wants to argue that there are some things that we rationally know, even as Christians, and so we follow rationality, at least up to some point. But that's not typical. Mostly in the history of philosophy, religion and ethics are not as unified as they are in St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't do the right thing. In religion, typically, in Eastern religion, we are often led to seek more than anything a sort of even keel. Buddha, for instance, taught that the reality that we live in, this world, is what he calls samsara. It's suffering. That's probably the easiest way to translate the Sanskrit samsara. So this world is the experience of suffering. There's no way out of it except to be above it. So when we seek enlightenment, according to Buddha, we then become above the suffering. Now, it doesn't mean we're not going to die. Certainly, we're going to die. But if we are truly enlightened, according to Buddha, then our death means nothing. So there's a famous story about one of the iterations of Buddha. I think it's Gautama. Maybe it's earlier than Gautama, but um, he's out walking. Buddha's out walking, and he comes across a mother tiger that is starving to death, and her cubs are starving to death, and she's so weak she can't get up to feed them. So he sacrifices himself to the mother tiger. He lays down in front of her to allow her to eat him so that she can then gain the strength to save her cubs. Well, she's so weak that she can't even get up the energy in order to kill him. So what he does is he slits his throat over her mouth so that she can lick his blood, gain strength by that, to gain enough strength to get up and eat him so that she can, again, have the energy to feed her cubs. Now, why that story? Well, the story is that reality is unimportant. What is truly the most important thing is to do away with reality. So when we talk about being reborn over and over again, that's not the end of Buddhism, as many people think. The end of Buddhism is to not be reborn. So the image of Christianity is the cross. The image of Buddhism is the extinguishing of the candle, because that dimly lit candle is all reality is. The truth is way beyond that. So we act sacrificially in Buddhism. Now, in Christianity, we act sacrificially, but for a different reason. We act sacrificially in Christianity out of love, and that is the main ethic of both Judaism and Christianity is love. So love is transcending the law to some degree in Christianity. Now, is there a difference between Buddhism and Christianity and Judaism over this? Yeah, because in Buddhism, it's not necessarily love, it's simply the unreality of reality. In Christianity, love transcends reality, and love is the reality. But that's a different question than what ought I to do based upon epistemology, ontology, and logic. So there's a difference between philosophical ethics and religious ethics. All of you remember the parable of the Good Samaritan, and I forget whether it's Luke or Matthew's gospel. But what the Good Samaritan does is, out of love and respect for his fellow man, and he's a Samaritan, number one, which the Jews could not stand. So Jesus tells this as really almost a joke upon Judaism, that here's a lowly Samaritan that gets love. Okay. Now, the last thing that is often confused with, I think most often confused with ethics, is etiquette. Many of you know, perhaps you don't, I don't know, that Renault, the French car company Renault, bought the Japanese car company Nissan, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And when the Renault executives went to Japan to Tokyo to finalize the deal. They walked into the room and just began to lay out the deal. And the Japanese executives were incensed that the Renault executives didn't bow to them when they came into the room, which is the way you show deference in Japanese culture. So the deal fell through for a while, simply because the Renault executives were so uppity, hoity-toity, that they refused to bow to the Japanese, and the Japanese said, I ain't doing this. So that's etiquette. When I was a child, I walked into, I remember my elementary school principal always stood at the front door of the school in the morning. And of course, I was a baseball player and I always had my baseball cap on. And if I crossed the threshold of that school with my baseball cap on, Principal Martin would slap the back of my head, slap the cap off my head and say, "Pick it up, boy." That is a way of telling me I was a bad person because I made the faux pas of wearing my cap into the school. Well, that is a confusion of etiquette and ethics. The fact that I wear my hat inside a building does not make me a bad person. To do what my principal did is to confuse ethics and etiquette. And most of what we do today is etiquette. I suspect that that's the reason major companies give money to universities, so that we will teach you big business etiquette and not necessarily courage and justice. But they are mistaken if they think that the purpose of ethics is to teach you not to steal their pencils. That's unfortunately the assumption, I think, of ethics. Sometimes if you are taught properly, ethics will make you dangerous in the workplace. Just saying. All right. I'm going to scroll slowly through this. This is Antigone and early Greek literature. I had to read this in when I was in high school. Euripides is the author. And you can look that up later on if you like. Read that at your leisure. You won't be examined on that, but that is a history of the problem of confusing etiquette and ethics. What King Creon was confusing was Antigone's duty to bury her brother with the fact that her brother had been a rebellious sort and didn't deserve burying. So he's not concerned with what ought I to do. He's simply making a political point. All right, now you can see this in Poemon. I want you to make sure that you pay attention to this. The 5 formal traits of ethics or moral theory according to Poemon. All right, here they are: prescriptivity, universalizability, overridingness, publicity, and practicality. an ethical theory is imperative. It's important. Do this. That's what the imperative is. Behave this way, act this way. An ethical theory is public. It can't be private. It can't be something that the upper classes can get by with and us peasants can't. If it's truly an ethical theory, it's public and it's for everybody. It's prudent. It shouldn't be stupid. It should be easy to do. It's universal. It applies to all, right? Not just one class. Not just, it's not what's good for thee, but not me. It has to be universal. It has to be for everybody. If it's not an ethical theory. It's got to be true for Buddhists, Christians, and Jews, not just one religious group. Now, that doesn't mean that these religious groups can't have overriding and more important ethical concepts. I don't mean that. But it has to be, they can't demand that the rest of society adhere to those rules. But society can demand that following the imperative, public, prudent, universal, and prime character of ethical theory, if it is all of these, then it is an ethical theory, and then it is just, prudent, moderate, and courageous. Now, all of this is inside the writing of Poyman on the chapters in Poyman. So I'm going to forego that and talk to you about some assignments. All right, we've talked about the web text. We showed them about the thinking and writing philosophy tools. I've talked to you about the glossary on the little square on the right. We finished the lecture on what it is that's unique and what it is that philosophy does. Coming up this week, after you finish the glossary and the how to write philosophy, etc. Part, then begin reading the first chapter. That should be done by next week at this time. And I'm going to send out to you a couple of links. One of them is to the Plato's Divided Line part of the Republic, which is his greatest dialogue. That's 8 or 9 pages that you need to have read by the middle of March. And I'm also going to send out a chart graph of explaining the divided line in pictorial form, so that you can, some of you like to read sort of pictographic explanations. Some of you prefer to read, but I would ask you to take the model and apply it to the reading so that you can follow what Plato's up to. I'm going to send that out in the next few days. So that's where we're going from here. Next Monday or Tuesday, sometime, I'll send out another invitation and we will go over chapter 1. And at that point, I'll decide whether I'm going to go over the chapter sort of line by line, underlining what you need to know at that point, or in other words, I might want to give one lecture a week or 2. I'm going to decide that. All right. All that's left now is to please, if you guys have any questions, the ones who were here, please ask me now, because I'm sure if you've got a question, those who will watch the video later will have the same question, but not be able to ask it. So anybody got any questions? If you do, please unmute yourself and ask away.
So right now we just need to read the introduction in chapter 1 in our books.
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
And for the middle of March, I'm giving you some time because I'm adding this to the reading. So I'm giving you some time to do this, but watch the divided line or read the divided line link.
And you'll put that out in an email.
Well, I'll put it on Blackboard.
Okay.
Under announcements.
You had mentioned another assignment that would be due in March. What is that going to be?
That's to have read the link that I'll be sending out later this week on Blackboard.
I thought there was something else you said that maybe was going to be due in April, but then you said March instead.
No, that was it, I think.
Okay. And then chapter 1 will be focused on Postman, and is that in chapter 1?
Yep.
Okay.
And that will be for next week.
Okay.
And if if anybody's got any problems, I'm just a Zoom meeting away. If you want to talk to me, if you got any worries, I don't want you to have worries. Because look, if you're worried, that's a good sign. Only fools don't worry, but I don't want you to be perplexed by your worry. If you need to talk to me by email, or if you want just a face-to-face Zoom video, that's going to be available to you. I want you to have as real of an experience as you can have taking an internet course. I want this to be real and not specious or in the sky someplace. That's the reason I'm here, behind the camera weekly, or sometimes more than once a week. And I want you to be comfortable, and I want you to be able to ask me questions. So whether you guys that are here with me today have any questions or will have some questions, for the camera. And that goes for everybody who will watch this on YouTube as well. So if you got any questions, then shoot them to me. Don't sit there and stew in your soup of worry. All right. I appreciate all of you guys who are here more than you can ever know. And again, I don't require that you be present, but I do try to mix up the times to do this at different times, hoping that I can get at least some people some of the time, one of the times. That's the reason that the times differ. If it were a face-to-face class or a synchronous class, I might do a class meeting time at the time that the class was supposed to meet. Although I taught this asynchronously last semester, and everybody had to work because of the times that we live in, and so they couldn't come anyway. So, but I can meet with you at your convenience. If that's at night, it doesn't make any difference to me. I'm here for you. Just want you to know that. All right.
I appreciate it. Hope you have a good rest of your week.
All right. You guys too. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Bye-bye.